Baby saw a bear cub stuck in a camping store tent display. What Baby did next pitched hope. The afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of Mountain Peak Outdoor Supply, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. Ethan Marshall pushed the shopping cart slowly through the wide aisles, his 10-month-old daughter, Lily Morgan, seated comfortably in the front, her chubby legs swinging back and forth as she babbled softly to herself. The store was nearly empty at this hour, just past 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, when most people were still at work and the weekend camping crowd hadn't yet arrived to browse the latest gear. The air inside carried that distinctive smell of new canvas mixed with rubber and the faint chemical scent of waterproofing spray that seemed to permeate every outdoor equipment store. Ethan had come here looking for a new sleeping bag, something warmer for the upcoming winter camping trip he'd been planning with his brother, but he found himself wandering aimlessly through the displays, enjoying this rare, quiet moment with his daughter. Lily had been fussy all morning, cutting another tooth, but something about the store seemed to calm her. Maybe it was the soft background music playing overhead, some generic instrumental tune that floated through the space like a gentle breeze. Or perhaps it was the way the afternoon light made everything glow with a warm, golden hue. She clutched her favorite toy, a small stuffed star with a gentle smile stitched across its yellow fabric face, occasionally bringing it to her mouth to chew on one of its soft points. Ethan watched her from the corner of his eye as he examined a row of hiking boots, noting how her dark eyes tracked movement with that intense focus only babies seemed to possess, as if every single thing in the world was worth studying with complete dedication. They moved deeper into the store, past the clothing section where mannequins stood frozen in mid-adventure poses, dressed in the latest moisture-wicking fabrics and insulated jackets. Past the wall of climbing gear where carabiners hung like metallic fruit from pegboard branches, their surfaces catching the light and sending tiny reflections dancing across the ceiling. The store seemed to stretch on forever, each section flowing into the next, creating a maze of outdoor possibilities. Ethan remembered coming to places like this as a child with his own father, running his hands along the smooth aluminum of tent poles, imagining all the places they might take him someday. Now, here he was, a father himself, sharing this same space with his daughter, though she was still too young to understand the promise of adventure that surrounded them. The tent display section occupied a large corner of the store, where several models had been set up for customers to examine. Some were simple two-person backpacking tents, their lightweight frames barely visible beneath taut nylon shells. Others were massive family camping structures with multiple rooms and windows, looking more like temporary homes than portable shelters. The largest one, a deluxe 8-person model in forest green, stood at the center of the display like a fabric castle. Its rain fly had been pulled back to show the spacious interior, and LED lanterns had been placed inside to demonstrate how much light the white ceiling would reflect at night. Small signs explained the features of each tent, listing things like bathtub floor construction and no-see-um mesh. That would mean nothing to most casual shoppers, but spoke volumes to serious outdoor enthusiasts. Lily suddenly made a sound. Not quite a word, but more purposeful than her usual babbling. Her small hand extended, pointing toward the display area with surprising determination. At first, Ethan thought she was simply attracted to the colors, or perhaps the way the lantern light created interesting shadows inside the tents. He pushed the cart closer, humoring her interest, thinking maybe she'd enjoy looking at the bright fabrics up close. But as they approached, her pointing became more insistent, and she began making soft "oh, oh, oh" sounds that usually meant she'd discovered something particularly fascinating. Ethan followed the line of her chubby finger. expecting to see perhaps a colorful sleeping bag or maybe another child playing in one of the display tents. What he saw instead made him stop so abruptly that the cart's wheels squeaked against the floor. Inside the largest display tent, partially hidden behind a folding camp chair and a display of camping cookware, was a small black shape that definitely didn't belong there. At first, his mind tried to rationalize it as maybe a large stuffed animal that someone had left behind, or perhaps some kind of realistic display meant to show how wildlife-proof the tent was. But then the shape moved, just slightly, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. It was a bear cub, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, and it appeared to be tangled in the tent's interior gear loft, a mesh storage area suspended from the ceiling meant for holding flashlights and other small items. The cub couldn't have been more than a few months old, its fur still carrying that fluffy quality that young bears have before their adult coat comes in. Its eyes were wide, with what Ethan could only interpret as confusion and fear, though it wasn't making any sound. The gear loft had somehow wrapped around one of its hind legs, and every movement the cub made seemed to tangle it further. The absurdity of the situation struck Ethan even as his mind raced through what he should do. How had a bear cub gotten into the store? Where was its mother? Should he call animal control? The store management? His daughter, meanwhile, seemed completely unfazed by the presence of a wild animal just feet away from them. She continued pointing, now adding a delighted giggle to her sounds, as if she'd just discovered the world's best secret. Ethan carefully backed the cart away, his eyes never leaving the cub, which had now noticed them and was watching with equal intensity. He reached for his phone, thinking he should call someone, anyone, but his hand stopped midway. The cub wasn't acting aggressive or even particularly frightened anymore. It had stopped struggling against the mesh and was simply sitting there, its dark eyes moving between Ethan and Lily with what almost looked like curiosity. There was something about the moment that felt suspended, as if time had slowed down just for the three of them. The store's background music continued its gentle melody, and somewhere in the distance, Ethan could hear the faint beep of a checkout scanner, reminding him that normal life was continuing all around this extraordinary scene. Lily dropped her stuffed star, and it fell from the cart, landing softly on the floor. Before Ethan could retrieve it, she began making reaching motions toward the tent, her sounds becoming more insistent. The cub's head tilted at the noise, and for a moment, Ethan could have sworn he saw something almost like recognition in its eyes. Not of Lily specifically, but perhaps of another young creature, small and curious about the world. The thought was ridiculous, anthropomorphizing a wild animal, but in that strange, quiet moment in the camping store, surrounded by all the gear humans use to venture into nature, it didn't seem entirely impossible that some kind of understanding could pass between species. The store felt different now, charged with a kind of energy that made the hair on Ethan's arms stand up. He looked around, expecting to see other shoppers or staff members who might help him figure out what to do, but the aisles remained empty. It was as if the universe had conspired to create this private moment, this impossible encounter that no one would believe if he tried to explain it later. The afternoon sun had shifted, sending a beam of light directly through the tent's mesh window, illuminating the cub in a way that made its fur seem to glow. Dust motes danced in the air above it, and for just a second the scene looked like something out of a nature documentary, except it was happening in the middle of a retail store, surrounded by price tags and sale signs. The cub made its first sound then, a soft huffing noise that wasn't quite a growl but wasn't friendly either. It was more like frustration, the sound any young creature might make when things weren't going its way. Lily responded with her own sound, a sympathetic aw that she'd recently learned and had been applying to everything from dropped toys to pictures of puppies and books. The cub's ears perked up at this, and it shifted position slightly, causing the gear loft to swing. This seemed to startle it, and it froze again, eyes wide. Ethan found himself holding his breath, waiting to see what would happen next, his protective instincts warring with a strange fascination that kept him rooted in place. That's when he noticed the shadow. It appeared suddenly in his peripheral vision, dark and large against the bright window at the front of the store. Ethan turned his head slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements that might startle the cub, and felt his blood run cold. Standing just outside the store's main entrance, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, was an adult bear. The mother, it had to be. She was massive compared to the cub, her bulk blocking out a significant portion of the afternoon sunlight. But she wasn't pawing at the glass or showing any signs of aggression. She was simply standing there, perfectly still, watching. Her eyes seemed to be focused not on her cub, but on Ethan and Lily, as if she was assessing them, determining whether they were a threat. The rational part of Ethan's brain screamed at him to grab Lily and run, to get as far away from this situation as possible. Bears were dangerous, unpredictable, especially mothers with cubs, but something about the mother bear's stillness, the way she simply watched without making any aggressive moves, kept him frozen in place. It was as if she understood that her cub was trapped, and that these humans, strange as it might seem, might be the key to freeing it. The thought was insane, attributing complex reasoning to a wild animal, but in that moment, with the afternoon sun creating a halo effect around the bear's silhouette, anything seemed possible. Lily had gone quiet, her attention now split between the cub in the tent and the large shape outside. She didn't seem frightened, just intensely curious, her little fingers gripping the cart's handle as she leaned forward for a better look. Ethan placed a protective hand on her back, ready to shield her if necessary. But the expected danger never materialized. Instead, the three of them, man, baby, and bear, remained locked in this strange tableau, each waiting for someone else to make the first move. The store's music had shifted to something slower, more contemplative, and Ethan found himself thinking about all the camping trips he'd taken, all the times he'd hung his food high in trees to avoid attracting bears, all the warnings he'd read about keeping a safe distance from wildlife. None of those guidelines covered what to do when you found a bear cub tangled in a display tent while its mother watched from outside a retail store. Time seemed to stretch like taffy, each second feeling like a minute. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Lily's small body warm against his hand, could smell that distinctive outdoor store scent more intensely than before, as if all his senses had been heightened by the surreal situation. He thought about calling out for help, but something told him that introducing more people, more chaos, might break whatever delicate balance was keeping this encounter peaceful. The mother bear hadn't tried to enter the store, hadn't even approached the doors. She was maintaining her distance, watching, waiting, trusting in a way that seemed impossible for a wild animal. The cub shifted again, and this time the movement loosened the mesh slightly. It seemed to notice this and began moving more deliberately, though still carefully, as if it too understood that panic would only make things worse. Lily made another soft sound, almost encouraging, and stretched her arms toward the tent. The stuffed star lay forgotten on the floor, its smiling face pointing up at the ceiling as if enjoying the show. Ethan found himself thinking about the nature of trust, how sometimes it appeared in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely participants. Here, in this camping store, surrounded by all the gear humans used to safely explore the wilderness had come to them, bringing with it a lesson he couldn't quite articulate yet. The mother bear took a single step closer to the window, and Ethan tensed. But she stopped there, her massive head tilting slightly as if she was trying to get a better view inside. Her eyes, when Ethan could see them clearly, weren't the savage, wild eyes he'd expected. They held intelligence, concern, and something that looked remarkably like patience. She knew her cub was in there, could probably smell it, hear it, and yet she waited. It was a kind of faith that Ethan found both terrifying and deeply moving. She was trusting them, these strange humans in this strange human place, not to hurt her baby. The weight of that trust settled on Ethan's shoulders like a physical thing. The store remained eerily quiet, except for the soft background music and the occasional rustle from the cub's continued efforts to free itself. Ethan wondered if anyone else was even in the building, or if somehow, impossibly, they were alone with this situation. He thought about security cameras, wondered if someone in a back office was watching this unfold on a monitor, frozen with the same indecision he felt. What was the protocol for this? What page in the employee handbook covered bear cubs in the tent display? The absurdity of it might have made him laugh if the situation wasn't so surreal, so charged with potential danger and unexpected beauty. Lily's patience, limited as it was at 10 months old, began to waver. She started to fuss, making soft whimpering sounds that usually preceded full crying. Without thinking, Ethan began to rock the cart gently, an automatic response to soothe her. The movement caught the cub's attention, and it stopped struggling to watch them. There was something almost hypnotic about the back-and-forth motion, and Ethan found himself continuing it even after Lily had settled. The cub's eyes followed the movement, its body relaxing slightly. Even the mother bear seemed affected, her rigid posture softening just a fraction. It was as if the simple, rhythmic motion had cast a spell over all of them, creating a bubble of calm in what should have been a terrifying situation. The afternoon sun continued its journey across the sky, and the light in the store shifted subtly. The harsh brightness that had illuminated the tent display earlier softened to a warm amber glow that made everything look like it was covered in honey. The cub had managed to work one paw free from the mesh, and Ethan could see its small claws, still pale and new-looking, not yet worn down by years of foraging and climbing. It was so young, so vulnerable, and yet here it was, trapped in this human space while its mother waited outside with a patience that seemed almost supernatural. Ethan thought about his own father, how he'd always said that nature had its own wisdom, its own way of working things out if humans just stepped back and let it happen. But this wasn't exactly a natural situation, was it? This required some kind of intervention, some bridge between the wild and the civilized. As if reading his thoughts, Lily reached out again, this time making a clear grabbing motion toward the tent. She wanted to help, Ethan realized, even if she didn't fully understand what was happening. It was pure instinct, one young creature recognizing another in distress. He thought about all the times he'd seen her do this with her toys, carefully arranging them, making sure each stuffed animal was comfortable and included in whatever game she was playing. Now she wanted to extend that same care to this real, living creature that had somehow wandered into their ordinary afternoon and transformed it into something extraordinary. The innocence of it, the pure intention unmarred by fear or prejudice, made Ethan's chest tight with emotion. The cub made another sound, louder this time, a clear call that seemed directed at its mother. The adult bear's ears swiveled forward, and she made a low rumbling sound in response. So deep, Ethan felt it more than heard it. It vibrated through the window, through the floor, a reassurance that transcended species. The cub seemed to calm at this, its struggles becoming more methodical, less panicked. It was learning, Ethan realized, figuring out the puzzle of its entanglement with the focused determination he'd seen in Lily when she was working out how to stack her blocks or fit shapes into her sorting toy. The parallel was both absurd and profound, a reminder that learning, growing, solving problems, these were universal experiences, not limited to humans in their complicated lives. The store's automatic lights flickered on as the natural light began to dim slightly, though it was still far from dark outside. The sudden change made everyone, human and bear alike, freeze for a moment. Then, as if the new lighting had provided some kind of signal, things began to shift. The cub's movements became more confident, and with a twist that looked almost practiced, it managed to extract its other hind leg from the mesh. It was almost free now, just one front paw still tangled, and Ethan could see the moment approaching when it would be completely loose. What would happen then? Would it panic and run deeper into the store? Would the mother try to break in? The possibilities raced through his mind, each more alarming than the last. But Lily, in her innocent wisdom, had already moved past worry to solution. She began babbling excitedly, her sounds taking on the tone she used when she was talking to the cat next door, a mixture of nonsense syllables and genuine attempt at communication. The cub's head turned toward her, and for a long moment Baby and Bear regarded each other with the kind of open curiosity that only the very young possess. There was no fear there, no learned wariness, just interest in another small being navigating a big, confusing world. Ethan found himself holding his breath again, watching this impossible exchange, this moment that felt both completely wrong and perfectly right. The mother bear had moved again, this time to a different window where she could see the tent display more clearly. Her movements were slow, deliberate, non-threatening, despite her impressive size. She was close enough now that Ethan could see details. The way her fur rippled in the breeze outside, the scars on her muzzle that spoke of years surviving in the wild, the way her breath fogged the glass slightly as she exhaled. She was magnificent and terrifying and somehow, in this moment, almost relatable. A mother watching her child struggle, wanting to help but forced to wait, to trust, to hope. How many times had Ethan felt that same helplessness watching Lily navigate some baby challenge, wanting to intervene, but knowing she needed to figure it out herself. The cub finally freed itself completely. The gear loft snapping back into place with a soft twang. For a moment it sat in the tent, perhaps surprised by its sudden freedom, looking around as if seeing the space for the first time. Its eyes landed on Lily's stuffed star on the floor, and it sniffed in that direction, curious. Lily made an encouraging sound, and before Ethan could stop her, she was leaning dangerously far out of the cart, reaching toward the toy. He caught her, pulled her back to safety, but her intention was clear. She wanted the cub to have her star, wanted to share in the way only children can, without thought for the value of the thing being given. The movement attracted the cub's attention fully, and it took a tentative step toward the tent's opening. Then another. It was at the entrance now, nose twitching as it processed all the strange scents of the store, the synthetic fabrics, the rubber, the lingering traces of hundreds of human visitors. But underlying all of that was something familiar. The scent of its mother, strong and reassuring even through the walls and windows that separated them. The cub made another sound, higher pitched, almost questioning, and the mother responded with that same deep rumble, patient and encouraging. It was a conversation Ethan couldn't fully understand but felt privileged to witness, this primal exchange of reassurance and love. The cub emerged from the tent fully, its small body tense but not panicked. It looked around the store with what seemed like wonder, taking in the strange landscape of camping gear and artificial lighting. Its gaze kept returning to Lily, who was now bouncing in the cart with excitement, her happy sounds filling the quiet space. The cub took a step toward them, then seemed to think better of it, turning instead toward the front of the store where its mother waited. But the path wasn't clear. There were displays and aisles and the complicated geography of retail space between them. The cub sat down, looking lost despite its recent victory over the gear loft. That's when Ethan heard footsteps, soft but purposeful, coming from the back of the store. He turned to see a woman approaching, wearing the store's uniform but moving with a calmness that suggested this wasn't her first unusual situation. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to take in the entire scene without surprise. She nodded at Ethan, a small gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and reassurance, then turned her attention to the cub. She didn't speak, didn't make any sudden movements, just stood there observing with the patience of someone who understood that sometimes the best action was no action at all. The woman reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out what looked like a small bag of trail mix. She opened it carefully, the crinkling sound drawing the cub's attention, and placed a small handful on the floor between the cub and the front of the store. Then she stepped back, creating a clear path. The cub sniffed the air, interested but cautious. The mother bear had noticed the woman too, but instead of showing alarm, she seemed to relax slightly, as if this human's presence was somehow reassuring. It made Ethan wonder if perhaps this wasn't the first time wildlife had wandered into the store, if maybe this woman had experience with such things. Lily had gone quiet, watching the woman with the same intensity she usually reserved for new foods or unfamiliar faces. She seemed to sense that something important was happening, that the adults were working together to solve a problem she didn't fully understand, but found fascinating nonetheless. The woman smiled at her, a grandmother's smile full of warmth and understanding, then looked at Ethan with eyes that seemed to say everything would be all right. There was a confidence in her bearing that was contagious, and Ethan found his own tension easing slightly. Maybe this would end well after all. Maybe sometimes impossible situations had impossible solutions. The cub finally moved toward the trail mix, hunger overcoming caution. As it ate, the woman moved slowly to a keypad on the wall and entered a code. There was a soft beep, and Ethan heard the automatic doors at the front of the store unlock. The woman then walked, still with that same measured calm, toward the entrance, pushing displays aside to create a wider path. The mother bear watched all of this, her head moving to track the woman's movements, but she made no aggressive moves. If anything, she seemed to understand what was happening, that this human was trying to help, trying to reunite her with her cub. The cub finished the small pile of trail mix and looked around for more. The woman placed another small handful a few feet closer to the door, then another beyond that, creating a trail. It was like something out of a fairy tale, Ethan thought, breadcrumbs leading the way home. The cub followed, its movements becoming more confident with each step. Lily clapped her hands, a sharp sound that made everyone freeze for a moment. But then the cub continued, seemingly encouraged by her enthusiasm. It was surreal, watching this wild animal navigate the camping store, passing displays of bear-proof containers and wildlife deterrents, a living reminder of why all these products existed in the first place. As the cub approached the automatic doors, they slid open with their usual mechanical whoosh. The cub startled, jumping back, but the scent of its mother, so much stronger now with the barrier removed, drew it forward again. The mother bear had backed away from the entrance, giving her cub space to exit on its own terms. She made soft sounds, encouraging but not demanding, letting her baby make this last part of the journey independently. It was a lesson in parenting that transcended species, the delicate balance between protection and allowing growth, between safety and independence. The cub reached the threshold, pausing there for a long moment. It looked back into the store, its gaze finding Lily one more time. She waved, a baby's uncoordinated but enthusiastic gesture, and made a sound that might have been bye-bye, though it was hard to tell with her limited vocabulary. The cub tilted its head, as if considering this strange farewell, then turned and bounded out of the store toward its mother. The reunion was brief but touching, the mother bear sniffing her cub thoroughly, checking for injuries, before nudging it away from the store and toward the tree line that bordered the parking lot. They didn't run, didn't flee in panic. They walked with dignity, the mother bear occasionally looking back as if to acknowledge what had just happened. The woman stood at the door, watching them go, and Ethan pushed the cart up beside her, Lily still waving enthusiastically at the retreating bears. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Ethan asked quietly. The woman smiled, a mysterious expression that held stories he could only imagine. "Nature finds its way into our lives in the strangest ways," she said. "Sometimes we just need to be patient and let it find its way back out again." As the bears disappeared into the trees, Lily made a distressed sound, pointing at the floor. Her stuffed star still lay where it had fallen, forgotten in all the excitement. Ethan bent to pick it up, but as he did, he noticed something else. There, just inside the door where the cub had paused, was a small tuft of black fur caught on the doorframe. Without really thinking about it, he carefully pulled it free and tucked it into his pocket. A reminder, a piece of evidence that this impossible afternoon had really happened. Lily clutched her star when he handed it back to her, but her eyes remained fixed on the tree line where the bears had vanished. The woman began to close the door, entering another code to lock it properly this time. "You know," she said, turning to Ethan with that same knowing smile, "that mother bear has been around these parts for years. We call her Patience. She's raised 3 litters that we know of, and she's never caused any trouble. It's like she understands the boundaries between her world and ours. Today, those boundaries got a little blurred, but look how it worked out. Sometimes trust is all we need, even between species that should be afraid of each other." Ethan thought about that as he continued shopping, though his heart wasn't really in it anymore. How could he focus on sleeping bags and camp stoves after what had just happened? Lily seemed affected too, quieter than usual, her eyes tracking to the windows as if expecting to see the bears return. He ended up buying just a few small items, things he didn't really need but felt obligated to purchase after the disruption. The woman checked him out herself, moving with the same calm efficiency she'd shown during the encounter. As she handed him his receipt, she paused. "Your daughter," she said, "she has a gift. The way she stayed calm, the way she seemed to understand, that's special." The drive home felt different, the familiar streets somehow transformed by what they'd witnessed. Ethan found himself thinking about boundaries and trust, about the wild spaces that still existed even in the middle of human civilization. He thought about Patience, the mother bear, and wondered how many times she'd watched humans from the safety of the forest, learning their patterns, understanding their nature just as they tried to understand hers. At a red light, he looked back at Lily in her car seat. She was holding her star up to the window, making it dance in the fading afternoon light, babbling happily to it as if telling it about their adventure. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat at his computer, searching for information about bears in the area. He found reports of sightings, warnings about securing garbage cans, advice for hikers and campers. but nothing about a mother bear named Patience who had learned to coexist with the human world. He wondered if the woman at the store had made up the name, or if there was a whole community of people who knew about this bear who kept her secret safe. The tuft of fur sat on his desk, impossibly soft and real, proof that sometimes the extraordinary breaks through into ordinary life. He thought about the story he would tell Lily when she was older, how he would explain that afternoon in the camping store. Would she remember any of it? The way the cub had looked at her, the way her innocent excitement had seemed to calm everyone, bear and human alike. Or would it fade like most early memories, leaving just a vague impression of something special, something different from the everyday routine of bottles and naps and diaper changes? He hoped something would remain. Some seed of understanding that the world was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than most people realized. The next day, life returned to normal. Ethan went to work, Lily went to daycare, and the camping store presumably continued selling gear to weekend adventurers. But something had shifted, some small recognition that the boundaries we draw between wild and civilized, between human and animal, are more fluid than we like to admit. Every time Ethan drove past the store, he found himself looking for shadows in the tree line, wondering if Patience was there, watching, remembering. And every time Lily saw a bear in a book or on TV, she would point excitedly and make the same sound she'd made that afternoon, as if recognizing a friend. A week later, Ethan took Lily back to the store. He told himself he needed to actually buy that sleeping bag, but really, he wanted to see if the woman would be there, if she might share more of the story. They found her in the tent display area, calmly arranging new models where the incident had occurred. She smiled when she saw them, that same knowing expression, and beckoned them over. "I have something for your daughter," she said, reaching behind a display. She pulled out a small stuffed bear, black like the cub had been, with a tag that read Patience Jr., from what looked like a local craftsperson. "Someone dropped this off yesterday," she said with a wink. "Said it belonged here." Lily grabbed the bear immediately, hugging it to her chest alongside her star. She babbled happily, a stream of baby talk that seemed to be introducing her two toys to each other. The woman watched with soft eyes, then looked at Ethan. "You know, I've worked here 15 years, and I've seen a lot of things. But what happened last week, the way your daughter connected with that cub, the way Patience trusted us to help, that was something special. It reminds me why I love this job, being at the intersection of two worlds, helping people prepare to enter nature, and occasionally, helping nature when it enters our space." She led them to a corner of the store Ethan hadn't noticed before, where a small display featured local wildlife photography and information about coexisting with the animals that shared the region. There, among the pictures, was a photo of a large black bear with 3 cubs, taken from a respectful distance. "That's Patience," the woman confirmed, "taken 2 years ago by a local photographer. The cub you met was probably from her newest litter. She usually keeps them well away from human areas, but sometimes curiosity gets the better of the young ones." She paused, looking at the photo with obvious affection. "We've had deer wander in during the winter, raccoons investigating the camping food displays, even had an owl roost in the rafters for a week. But this was the first time we've had a bear cub actually get stuck. I think Patience knew we'd help. Animals are smarter than we give them credit for." As they prepared to leave, Lily waved at the tent display, as if saying goodbye to the memory of what had happened there. The woman walked them to the door, the same door the cub had exited through. "You know," she said quietly, "I think moments like these are gifts. They remind us that we're all sharing this world, all just trying to survive and protect our young and find our way. Your daughter understood that instinctively. Don't let her lose that understanding as she grows up. The world needs more people who can see beyond the boundaries we create. Driving home, Ethan found himself thinking about boundaries again, about the invisible lines we draw and the moments when life refuses to respect them. He thought about Patience, somewhere in the forest with her cubs, teaching them about the world, about dangers and safe spaces, about when to trust and when to run. He wondered if she would teach them about the day one cub got stuck in a human place and was helped by a baby who didn't know enough to be afraid, by humans who chose compassion over protocol. It seemed like the kind of story that should be passed down, in whatever way bears share their important memories. That evening, as Ethan gave Lily her bath, she played with both her stuffed animals, making them dive and swim in the bubbles. The star and the bear seemed to be friends in whatever narrative she was creating, and she babbled to them constantly, her voice rising and falling with the drama of their adventures. Watching her, Ethan realized that she had already integrated the experience into her play, making it part of her understanding of the world. To her, bears weren't just dangerous wild animals to be avoided. They were creatures with families, with babies who could get scared and stuck, with mothers who loved them fiercely. It was a more complex, more beautiful understanding than most adults carried. The seasons changed, summer fading into fall, and Ethan did eventually buy that sleeping bag, though from a different store. He couldn't quite bring himself to make such a mundane purchase from the place where magic had happened. But he and Lily visited regularly, always stopping to say hello to the woman whose name, he learned, was Jessica Brooks. She always had a smile for them, and sometimes she would share other stories of wildlife encounters, though none quite as dramatic as theirs. The tent display had been rearranged, the gear lofts removed or secured differently, a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened. One October afternoon, as early snow dusted the mountains visible through the store windows, Jessica pulled Ethan aside while Lily played with a display of camping toys. "I thought you should know," she said quietly. "Patience and her cubs were spotted last week, heading to their winter den. All 3 cubs were with her, healthy and strong. The one from our adventure, the staff here have been calling him Lucky, was recognizable by a small patch of lighter fur on his back. They're all doing well." The relief Ethan felt surprised him. He hadn't realized how much he'd been worrying about that small bear, wondering if his adventure in the human world had caused lasting harm. Winter came properly, blanketing the area in snow, and the bears disappeared into their seasonal sleep. Ethan found himself telling the story at dinner parties, at work gatherings, anywhere people might listen. Some believed him, others were skeptical, but Lily's presence usually convinced them. There was something in the way she reacted to the story, the way she would hold up her bear and star, that made even doubters pause. Children, especially, loved the tale, and more than once Ethan found himself surrounded by wide-eyed kids at playground gatherings, all wanting to hear about the baby who helped save a bear. The story took on a life of its own in their small community. The camping store reported an uptick in visitors, people hoping to catch a glimpse of Patience or experience their own wildlife encounter. Jessica good-naturedly fielded questions, but was careful never to encourage people to seek out the bears. "They're wild animals," she would remind everyone. What happened was extraordinary precisely because it was unexpected. We respect them by giving them space, by being prepared for encounters but not seeking them out. It was a message that resonated, and the local hiking groups began including it in their safety talks. Spring arrived with its usual fanfare of melting snow and emerging wildflowers, and with it came news that Patience had emerged from her den with her yearling cubs. They were spotted several times, always at a distance, going about their bear business of foraging and exploring. Ethan found himself scanning the tree lines during hikes, not hoping for an encounter but simply aware in a way he hadn't been before. The wilderness felt less separate now, more like a neighbor whose boundaries you respected, but whose existence enriched your own. Lily, now approaching 2 years old and speaking in short sentences, would often ask to see bears. Ethan would show her pictures, take her to the Natural History Museum, but he knew she was asking about something more specific. She wanted to see her bear, the one from the store. He tried to explain that the bear was wild, that it lived in the forest, that they had been lucky to meet once but probably wouldn't meet again. She would nod solemnly, seeming to understand, but then she would hug her stuffed bear tighter and whisper secrets to it that Ethan couldn't quite hear. One day in late spring, Ethan decided to take Lily on her first real hike. Nothing ambitious, just a short nature walk on a well-maintained trail not far from where the camping store incident had occurred. Lily rode in a carrier on his back, chattering constantly about everything she saw: trees, birds, flowers, clouds. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Ethan found himself seeing the forest through her eyes, everything fresh and wonderful and worth commenting on. They stopped for a snack at a small clearing, Lily munching on crackers while Ethan enjoyed the peaceful sounds of the forest. That's when he saw it, a distinctive track in the soft earth near the trail's edge. A bear print, large enough to be an adult, with 3 smaller sets of tracks following behind. They were recent, probably from that morning, heading deeper into the forest. Ethan's heart raced, but not with fear. It was more like recognition, like receiving news from an old friend. He showed Lily the tracks, explaining what they were, and she studied them with intense concentration. "Bear family," she said finally, with the certainty only toddlers possess. "Like us, but bears." The simplicity of her observation stuck with Ethan for days. Like us, but bears. It was perhaps the most accurate description of what he'd learned that day in the camping store. The fundamental similarities: parents protecting children, young ones exploring and getting into trouble, families staying together, transcended species. The differences were obvious, important to respect, but not as insurmountable as he'd once believed. They were all just creatures trying to make their way in a world that was simultaneously harsh and beautiful, dangerous and full of wonder. Jessica called one evening in early summer with news. "I thought you'd want to know," she said, her voice warm with excitement. A local wildlife photographer got some amazing shots of Patience and her cubs. One of them is definitely Lucky. That patch of lighter fur is even more distinctive now. But here's the interesting part. The photographer said Lucky was the boldest of the 3, the first to investigate new things, but also the quickest to return to his mother when called. It's like his adventure taught him both courage and caution. She paused, then added, "The photographer is putting together a book about local wildlife. He wants to include the story of what happened at the store, if you're comfortable with that." Ethan agreed, on the condition that Lily be referred to only by her first name, and that the focus remain on wildlife conservation and coexistence, rather than sensationalizing the encounter. The photographer, a thoughtful man named Connor Adams who'd been documenting the area's animals for decades, understood completely. He visited them several times, interviewing Ethan, observing Lily with her stuffed animals, even spending an afternoon with Jessica at the store. His approach was respectful, focusing on the broader message of how humans and wildlife could share space when both acted with patience and respect. The book, when it came out a year later, featured a beautiful photo of Patience and her cubs on the cover, with Lucky clearly visible with his distinctive markings. The chapter about the camping store incident was titled When Worlds Collide Gently, and it captured something essential about that afternoon, the way fear could transform into wonder when met with calmness and compassion. Lily, now 3 and increasingly verbal, loved having the book read to her, though she often corrected small details. Bear wasn't scared, she would insist. Bear was stuck. Big difference. The book's publication brought unexpected attention to their small town, with nature enthusiasts and families arriving, hoping to learn more about coexisting with wildlife. The camping store became an unofficial education center, with Jessica organizing monthly talks about local animals and safety. She always emphasized that what happened with Lucky was exceptional, not something to be sought out or replicated. We don't feed the bears, we don't approach them, we don't try to help unless absolutely necessary and safe to do so, she would say. What happened that day was a perfect storm of circumstances that resolved peacefully because everyone, human and bear, remained calm. Ethan attended some of these talks, usually with Lily, who had become something of a local celebrity among the nature-loving community. She would sit quietly during the presentations, her bear and Star in her lap, occasionally piping up with observations that showed she understood more than most gave her credit for. "Bears are neighbors," she said once, interrupting a discussion about wildlife management. "Neighbors you don't visit, but still neighbors." The simplicity of it, the matter-of-fact acceptance of coexistence, often left adults speechless. As Lily grew, so did her understanding of that afternoon's significance. By age 4, she could tell the story herself, with dramatic gestures and sound effects that made audiences laugh. But she never embellished the fear or danger. In her telling, it was always about a baby bear who got confused, a mama bear who waited patiently, and people who helped because that's what you do when someone, anyone, needs help. She had internalized the lesson so completely that it shaped how she approached the world, with a combination of reasonable caution and fundamental trust that Ethan found both admirable and slightly terrifying. The camping store installed a small plaque near the tent display. Nothing dramatic, just a simple message. In May 2023, this space hosted an unexpected visitor, a young bear cub who had wandered in and become tangled in a display. Through patience, compassion, and respect for wildlife, the situation was resolved peacefully, reminding us that we share this world with remarkable creatures who deserve our understanding and protection. Visitors often paused to read it, some skeptical, others intrigued. Those who asked Jessica for details got the full story, complete with her philosophy on coexistence, and occasionally, if they were lucky, a visit from Lily and Ethan. 5 years passed, and Lily started school with her bear, and Star still treasured possessions, though now they lived on a special shelf rather than being carried everywhere. She drew pictures of bears for art projects, wrote stories about animal families for creative writing assignments, and once gave a presentation about wildlife conservation that made her teacher cry. The camping store incident had become family legend, told and retold at gatherings, each telling adding not embellishments but deeper understanding of what it had meant. One autumn evening, as Ethan helped Lily with homework at the kitchen table, she suddenly looked up from her worksheet about animal habitats. "Dad," she said, "do you think Lucky remembers us?" It was a question she'd never asked before, and Ethan considered his answer carefully. "I don't know if bears remember things the way we do," he said finally, "but I think maybe he remembers feeling safe when he was scared, and maybe that's enough." Lily nodded, satisfied, and returned to her work, but Ethan saw her glance at her stuffed bear on its shelf, a small smile on her face. That winter brought heavy snows, and the bears disappeared into their dens as they always did. But spring brought unexpected news. Connor Adams, the wildlife photographer, called Ethan with excitement in his voice. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I've been tracking Patience's family, and Lucky, he's massive now, probably ready to go off on his own soon. But here's the thing. He's been seen near the camping store several times, not causing problems, just passing through, but he seems to pause near the building, like he's checking on it. Other bears in the area avoid human structures, but Lucky seems comfortable being near them, as long as he can maintain distance." The news spread through their small community like wildfire. Lucky, their Lucky, had grown up but hadn't forgotten. He had learned something that day too, something about the complexity of the world, about how danger and safety weren't always what they seemed. Jessica reported that she'd seen him once, early in the morning before the store opened, standing at the tree line just watching the building. "He looked healthy, strong," she said. But there was something in his posture, a kind of recognition. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing, but I swear he remembered. Lily took the news in stride, as if she'd expected nothing less. "He's checking on his friend place," she said simply, "making sure it's still safe." Whether she meant safe for bears or safe for humans was unclear, and perhaps that ambiguity was the point. In her world, shaped by that extraordinary afternoon, the two weren't mutually exclusive. Safety could be shared. Boundaries could be respected while still acknowledging connection, and different species could recognize something fundamental in each other that transcended their obvious differences. The story could have ended there, a neat conclusion about a bear who remembered and a girl who never forgot. But life doesn't wrap up so tidily, and the real impact of that afternoon continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Lily grew into a teenager with a deep respect for nature and a nuanced understanding of conservation that went beyond simple preservation. She volunteered with wildlife organizations, led nature walks for younger children, and always carried with her the lesson of that day, that patience and compassion could bridge the most unlikely gaps. 2 chapters of mentioned part has completed. The camping store became a pilgrimage site of sorts for families wanting to teach their children about coexistence with nature. Jessica, now in her 70s but still working part-time, would tell the story to anyone who asked, always emphasizing not the drama but the quiet miracle of mutual respect between species. The tent display area had been redesigned multiple times over the years, but there was always a small reminder of what had happened. Sometimes a photo, sometimes just the plaque. Always something to mark the spot where worlds had gently collided. Lucky was spotted occasionally over the years, always alone now. A massive bear with that distinctive patch of lighter fur that made him identifiable even from a distance. He never caused problems, never raided garbage cans or approached humans. It was as if he carried with him some understanding from that long-ago afternoon, some knowledge that humans could be trusted but were best appreciated from afar. Wildlife biologists studying the local bear population noted his unusual behavior patterns, his comfort near human structures combined with his careful maintenance of distance, and wondered what had shaped this unique approach to coexistence. Ethan, reflecting on it all years later, realized that the true gift of that afternoon wasn't just the extraordinary encounter itself, but the way it had shaped Lily's worldview. She moved through life with an openness to the unexpected, a readiness to find connection in unlikely places, and a deep understanding that fear and wonder were often just different responses to the same mystery. She had learned, before she could even properly talk, that the world was full of boundaries that seemed solid, but could become permeable with the right combination of patience, need, and trust. The last confirmed sighting of Lucky was on a crisp autumn morning, 15 years after the camping store incident. A hiker photographed him from a distance, standing on a ridge overlooking the town, his distinctive markings still visible despite his age. He stood there for a long time, the hiker reported, just watching the human settlement below with what looked like contemplation. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving only tracks in the early frost. Lily, now a college student studying wildlife biology, kept that photo on her dorm room wall, next to a childhood picture of herself holding her star and bear, a thread connecting past to present to future. Sometimes, late at night, when she was studying, Lily would look at those photos and think about connections, the visible ones we could document and study, and the invisible ones that shaped us in ways we barely understood. She thought about her father, who still got a distant look in his eyes when he told the story, about Jessica Brooks, who had known exactly what to do because she understood that sometimes the best action was patient inaction, about her mother, Bear Patience, who had trusted when every instinct must have screamed danger. And she thought about Lucky, somewhere in the wilderness, carrying within him the memory of a day when he was small and scared and stuck, and strangers of another species had shown him kindness. The stuffed star and bear still sat on their shelf in her childhood room, waiting for her visits home. They were worn now, loved into softness, their features faded but still recognizable. Sometimes her father would find her sitting on her old bed, holding them. Not with nostalgia, but with a kind of gratitude for the role they'd played in teaching her that the world was larger and stranger and more connected than most people ever realized. They were reminders that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as ordinary afternoons, that heroism can look like a baby reaching out to help, and that the boundaries between wild and tame, between self and other, were never as fixed as we might think. The camping store still stands, still sells gear to weekend adventurers and serious outdoors people alike. The staff still tells the story sometimes, though many of the details have been worn smooth by repetition, transformed from memory into legend. But the heart of it remains true, that once, in that very space, fear transformed into wonder, danger dissolved into connection, and a baby's innocent compassion helped reunite a wild family. It's a story that reminds us that we're all just creatures trying to find our way, that kindness transcends species, and that sometimes, if we're very lucky and very patient, the world reveals itself to be more magical than we ever dared imagine. In the end, the lasting impact wasn't measured in newspaper articles or viral videos, or even in the changes to store policy regarding wildlife encounters. It was measured in the way a little girl grew up understanding that different didn't mean dangerous, that respect and compassion could coexist, and that every creature, human, bear, or otherwise, was just trying to protect what they loved and find their place in a complicated world. It was measured in the way a community learned to see their wildlife neighbors not as threats or attractions, but as fellow residents deserving of space and respect. And it was measured in the way a young bear named Lucky grew into an adult who seemed to understand that the human world, while best avoided, wasn't inherently hostile, that sometimes, when you were small and scared and stuck, help could come from the most unexpected places. The story spread still, passed from parent to child, from ranger to hiker, from one generation to the next. Each telling adds its own flavor, its own lessons, but the core remains constant. A baby, a bear cub, a patient mother, and a moment when the impossible became possible through nothing more than trust. It's a story that makes us wonder about all the boundaries we accept as absolute, all the fears we carry without questioning, all the connections we miss because we're too afraid to look closely. It asks us to consider what might happen if we approached the unknown with curiosity instead of fear, with patience instead of panic, with open hearts instead of closed minds. And somewhere in the mountains, In the spaces between human and wild, the bears continue their ancient patterns of survival and growth. They den in winter and emerge in spring. They forage and play and raise their young, and occasionally, very occasionally, their paths cross ours in ways that remind us we're sharing this world, not separate from it, but part of it, connected in ways we're only beginning to understand. The camping store incident was just one moment in that larger story, but it was a moment that mattered, that changed lives, that proved that sometimes the most profound truths come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Years from now, when Lily has children of her own, she'll tell them this story. She'll show them the faded photographs, the worn stuffed animals, maybe even take them to the camping store to stand in the spot where it all happened. And she'll teach them what she learned that day before she could even speak in sentences, that the world is full of wonders, that kindness is the most powerful force we possess, and that sometimes, if we're patient enough, brave enough, and innocent enough to reach out when others would pull back, we might just find that the barriers between us and the rest of creation are far more permeable than we ever imagined. The afternoon sun still filters through those same windows, casting shadows across the polished floor where a baby once pointed at something extraordinary. The tent displays have changed, the gear has been updated, the staff has mostly turned over, but something essential remains. Call it memory, call it energy. Call it the lingering presence of a moment when everything could have gone wrong but didn't. It's there in the way parents hold their children a little closer when they hear the story, in the way hikers look at bear tracks with curiosity rather than just fear, in the way a community learned that coexistence isn't just possible but beautiful. And if you visit that camping store on a quiet afternoon, when the light is just right and the world feels full of possibility, you might feel it too, that sense that boundaries are suggestions, not absolutes, that connection can happen anywhere, between anyone, and that sometimes the smallest hands can bridge the widest gaps. You might remember that we're all just trying to find our way home, whether that home is a den in the mountains or a house in the suburbs, and that the journey is always easier when we meet each other with patience, compassion, and the kind of innocent wisdom that sees past our differences to the fundamental similarities beneath. This is the legacy of that afternoon. Not just a story about a bear cub rescued from a tent display, but a reminder that miracles happen when we choose trust over fear, when we recognize ourselves in the other, when we understand that helping isn't always about doing something dramatic, but sometimes just about being present, being calm, being willing to see the world through eyes other than our own. It's a legacy that lives on in every child who hears the story and looks at wildlife with wonder rather than fear, in every adult who remembers that once upon a time, in a camping store, the impossible happened and everyone went home safe. The story ends, but also doesn't end, because Lucky is still out there somewhere, living his bear life with whatever memory bears carry of their cubhood adventures. Because Lily is still growing, still learning, still carrying forward the lessons of that day. Because Jessica Brooks, though retired now, still visits the store sometimes, and smiles at the tent display with the satisfaction of someone who was exactly where they needed to be when they needed to be there. Because Ethan still reaches into his pocket sometimes and feels the phantom presence of that tuft of fur, that tangible reminder that once, for a few extraordinary minutes, the walls between worlds became transparent. And because somewhere, right now, in camping stores and forests and backyards and wild places all over the world, similar moments are happening. Moments where fear could take over but doesn't, where different species recognize something in each other that transcends their obvious differences, where patience and compassion prove more powerful than panic and aggression. Each of these moments adds another thread to the tapestry of coexistence. Another story to the growing collection of evidence that we're all more connected than we appear, all part of the same vast, intricate, beautiful web of life. The camping store stands as a monument to one such moment. But really, these monuments are everywhere if we know how to look for them. They're in the parks, where children feed ducks, in the gardens where humans and bees work together to create beauty and food, in the ocean where dolphins sometimes save drowning swimmers for reasons we can't fully understand. They're reminders that the world is not divided into human and natural, civilized and wild, us and them, but is instead one continuous, interconnected whole, where every action ripples outward in ways we can barely imagine. So, the next time you see a bear, whether in the wild or in a photograph, or even in a child's stuffed animal collection, remember Lucky and Lily and that afternoon when everything could have gone wrong, but didn't. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing is not to act, but to wait. Not to control, but to trust. Not to separate, but to connect. Remember that we're all just trying to navigate this complex world, to protect what we love, to find our way through the tangles that sometimes trap us. And remember that sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to be part of someone else's rescue story. Even if our only role is to stand witness, to hold space, to believe that everything will work out even when we can't see how. This is what Lily knows in her bones, what Lucky perhaps knows in whatever way bears know things, what Jessica Brooks demonstrated with her calm presence and trail mix breadcrumbs, what Ethan learned standing in that camping store with his heart pounding and his baby daughter teaching him about trust. It's what the story really means, beyond the drama and the unlikely circumstances and the happy ending. It means that we're never as alone as we think, never as separate as we believe, never as helpless as we fear. It means that connection is always possible, that help can come from the most unexpected sources, and that sometimes the smallest among us show us the way forward. The sun sets now behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that no camping store display could ever capture. Somewhere, bears are settling in for the night, their cubs safe beside them. Somewhere, children are being tucked into bed with stuffed animals clutched tight, their parents telling them stories about bravery and kindness and the magic that happens when different worlds meet gently. And somewhere, in the space between wild and tame, between fear and wonder, between separate and connected, the spirit of that afternoon lives on, reminding us that we're all part of the same story. All characters in the same vast narrative of life on this extraordinary planet. The camping store closes for the night, its lights dimming, its displays standing silent guard over gear that promises adventure, promises to take people out into the wild spaces where bears and humans have been negotiating their shared existence for thousands of years. But now, for those who know the store holds another promise too, the promise that sometimes, when we least expect it, those negotiations can happen right here in our everyday spaces, and they can end not in conflict but in understanding, not in fear but in wonder, not in separation but in the recognition of our shared vulnerability, our shared strength, our shared hope that tomorrow will bring new chances for connection, for kindness, for the kind of small miracles that change everything,